Good evening. From New York, we bring you a dramatic session of the United Nations Security Council, where the war in Ukraine once again dominated the global agenda. Under the chamber's blue and gold emblem, diplomats convened to confront the grim reality of a conflict now stretching into years. And tonight, Ukraine's leadership accused Russia of making a deadly choice: to kill rather than to seek peace. The meeting opened under the gavel of Panama's envoy, who currently presides over the council. It quickly became clear that this was not to be a routine diplomatic exchange. Instead, it was a battle of words that mirrored the battlefields of Ukraine itself. Taking the floor first, Ukraine's Prime Minister Yulia Svyrydenko delivered a searing condemnation. She told the council that the bombings of her country's cities were not accidents of war, but deliberate acts of terror designed to extinguish daily life. With deliberate clarity, she accused Moscow of rejecting dialogue, of rejecting peace, and of choosing instead what she called the path of killing. Her words carried the weight of a nation under siege, pleading for the international system to act before more lives are lost. Svyrydenko did not stop there. She turned her focus on the very council before her. Too often, she said, member states have spoken of the need for peace, but failed to turn words into action. Ukraine, she insisted, still holds out hope that the United Nations will match its principles with courage. The message was unmistakable. History is watching and credibility is at stake. The United Nations Secretariat echoed that sense of urgency. Miroslav Jencha, the Assistant Secretary General for Europe, Central Asia and the Americas, warned that attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure stand in direct violation of humanitarian law. His voice was measured, but the statement was clear. Such assaults are unacceptable, unlawful, and must stop immediately. The session then shifted to the voices of member states. Representing France, Deputy Permanent Representative Jay Darmadikari spoke in both French and English, stressing that Ukraine has been willing for 6 months to agree to an immediate and unconditional ceasefire. He reminded the chamber that President Volodymyr Zelensky has repeatedly signalled readiness for direct dialogue with Russian President Vladimir Putin. He noted that a bilateral meeting was even discussed under an initiative backed by US President Donald Trump, aimed at forging a just and lasting peace. But despite this, he said, Russia has yet to respond and instead has escalated its attacks, choosing bombardment over negotiation. Britain's Ambassador Barbara Woodward followed with a stark warning to Moscow. She declared that if Russia believed it could intimidate the international community, it was gravely mistaken. Far from weakening Western resolve, she said, these strikes only strengthen it. The United Kingdom, alongside its allies, would continue supporting Ukraine with the resources and weapons it needs to defend itself. Woodward framed the strikes not just as warfare, but as acts by a government bent on destroying Ukraine and sabotaging every diplomatic effort for peace. The United States voice came next. John Kelly, acting as Washington's representative at the Council, called on Russia to move toward peace immediately. He emphasized that leaders in Moscow and Kyiv must commit to bilateral talks without delay, and Kelly carried a sharper warning. President Trump has already indicated that further economic measures are on the table should Russia continue this war. Measures, Kelly said, that could dramatically shape Russia's future economic prosperity. For Washington, the choice for Moscow was clear: dialogue and peace, or deeper isolation and long-term decline. Then came Russia's turn to speak, a moment charged with tension. Deputy Ambassador Dmitry Polyansky pushed back firmly against the accusations. Speaking in Russian, translated live, he claimed that Western states were intentionally distorting the reality of events. Russia's recent strikes, he argued, were responses to Ukrainian attacks on oil refineries inside Russia after the Alaska summit. He insisted these facilities had no true military value, but were targeted in order to cripple Russia's energy supply and provoke retaliation. Moscow, he said, was being set up, painted as the aggressor while defending itself. His argument was that the West seeks to brand Russia's responses as disproportionate, twisting the narrative to portray Moscow as the saboteur of peace. And so the chamber echoed with dueling accounts: Ukraine presenting itself as the victim of terror, Russia framing itself as the victim of manipulation. Between them stood diplomats, each delivering warnings and appeals, each underscoring the vast gap between words and deeds. Yet beyond the speeches lies a troubling truth. Despite months of statements, despite multiple overtures for a ceasefire, no negotiations are underway. Ukraine says it is ready. Western allies say they will support dialogue. Even the United States, under President Trump, has presented initiatives for direct talks. But Russia has not stepped forward. Instead, missiles continue to fall, cities remain under threat, and the toll of human suffering deepens. The meeting served as more than a diplomatic exchange. It was a mirror of the broader conflict. Each strike in Ukraine has its echo in New York, each destroyed building matched by a volley of accusations inside the Security Council chamber. The Council, founded to maintain peace after the devastations of the Second World War, now struggles to prevent a new one in Europe. For Ukraine, the appeal was existential. Svyrydenko's words were not just a plea for political support, but a cry for survival. For Russia, the defense was about narrative, shifting blame, reframing its role, and resisting isolation. And for the Council as an institution, the question was sharper still. Does this body still have the power to enforce peace, or is it destined to remain a forum of speeches while civilians die outside its walls? The meeting ended without resolution. Diplomats filed out, the chamber emptied, and yet the war raged on. But the themes of the night remain etched in the record. Russia insists it is retaliating. Ukraine insists it is defending itself against terror. The West insists it will not back down. And the United Nations, caught between principle and paralysis, continues to debate. Tonight, as the lights dim over the East River, the words of Ukraine's Prime Minister still hang in the air. Russia, she said, continues to choose killing over ending the war. It is a charge that will reverberate long after the speeches fade, and one that leaves the Council and the world facing a question with no easy answer. This was the United Nations Security Council in session. From New York, we continue to follow the war in Ukraine, where the battle on the ground is matched by the battle of words in these halls of diplomacy.
Declaro abierta la sesión número 9990 del Consejo de Seguridad.
These killings are deliberate acts of terror. It's an informed decision taken by Moscow to continue its systematic campaign to terrorize civilians and extinguish any semblance of normal life. Yesterday, Russia again responded brutally to our attempts to engage them in a civilized dialogue, in the language of international law, peace, and respect for human life. Russia continues to choose killing over ending the war. Still hope that this Council and its member states, who have consistently emphasized the need for cessation of the hostilities, will now show the courage to turn word into action by supporting a relevant solution on the matter.
And reiterate that attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure violate international humanitarian law. We condemn all such attacks wherever they occur. They are unacceptable and must end immediately.
L'Ukraine a fait part, depuis 6 mois désormais, de sa disponibilité à mettre en place un cessez-le-feu immédiat et sans condition. Le président Volodymyr Zelensky a exprimé à plusieurs reprises sa disposition à engager des discussions directes avec le président Vladimir Poutine. Le principe d'une rencontre bilatérale a été acté dans le cadre de l'initiative du président Donald Trump en faveur d'une paix juste et durable que la France soutient. Pourtant, 2 semaines plus tard, le président russe n'a toujours pas donné suite et la Russie poursuit ses frappes meurtrières sur le territoire ukrainien.
But if Russia thinks it can intimidate us, it is wrong. This will only strengthen UK and Western resolve to support Ukraine. These strikes are the actions of a Russian government that is hell-bent on destroying Ukraine and sabotaging international peace efforts.
Russia must decide now to move toward peace. The leaders of Russia and Ukraine must agree to meet bilaterally. President Trump has warned of further economic measures the United States could take if Russia instead chooses to continue this war. Measures which could have far-reaching impact on Russia's future economic prosperity. The United States calls on the Russian Federation to avoid these consequences by stopping the violence and engaging constructively to end the war.
Кроме того, сознательно упускается из вида и тот факт, что наш комбинированный удар по объектам ВПК Украины был нанесен в ответ на совершавшиеся на протяжении последних почти 2 недель после завершения саммита на Аляске атаки на нефтеперерабатывающие заводы России. Очевидно, что эти удары не несут стратегического военного значения, так как не влияют на ситуацию на линии боевого соприкосновения. Их истинная цель – попытка нанести ущерб гражданской энергетической инфраструктуре, вызвать перебои в снабжении топливом. Более того, за такими действиями стоит расчет на то, чтобы спровоцировать ответные меры со стороны России, представить их в искаженном виде как несоразмерные, а затем обвинить Москву в саботаже любых попыток мирных переговоров. Показатель